Camping alone was supposed to clear my mind. That's what I told myself when I packed my gear and drove 6 hours away from the city. I was tired of everything: work, people, the constant hum of noise that never really stops. I needed quiet. Real quiet. The kind you only find deep in the woods, miles away from cell service, where it's just you and the trees and the wind. I hiked in about 2 miles, deep enough that I wouldn't run into anyone else. The sun was setting by the time I set up my tent, staining the sky a deep orange. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. It felt good, peaceful, like I had made the right decision. That feeling lasted until midnight. That's when I heard the footsteps. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Slow, deliberate. Someone was walking around my tent. I lay frozen in my sleeping bag, my breath shallow. My heart pounded against my ribs. Crunch, crunch. The footsteps circled my tent once. Twice. Then they stopped. I held my breath, straining to listen. Silence. Then breathing. Not the quick, sniffing breaths of an animal. Human breathing. Slow. Ragged. Close. I reached for my flashlight with shaking hands. The second I clicked it on, I unzipped the tent just enough to shine the beam outside. The light cut through the darkness. Nothing. Then I saw him. A man. He stood maybe 20 feet away, barefoot, shirtless, his skin pale as the moonlight. His ribs stuck out like he hadn't eaten in weeks. His lips moved, muttering, whispering, but no sound came out. A deep, primal instinct clawed its way up my spine. Run. But I couldn't move. Hello. I croaked. My voice sounded wrong, too loud in the silence. He didn't respond. His lips kept moving, forming silent words. Then he took a step forward. I snapped the flashlight beam up, shining it straight into his face. And he was gone. 1 second he was there, the next, nothing. Like he had never been there at all. A cold shiver crawled up my spine. My pulse pounded in my ears. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I was just tired. Then I heard it. A whisper. Let me in. Right behind me. I bolted. I didn't grab my shoes. I didn't grab my pack. I just ran, crashing through the trees, branches slicing my arms. My bare feet slapped against the damp ground, stinging with every step. I didn't look back. I ran until I saw the ranger station ahead, its porch light glowing in the darkness. I stumbled up the steps, hammering my fists against the door. It opened, and I nearly collapsed inside. The ranger was a big guy, thick beard, tired eyes. He stared at me, wide-eyed, as I gasped for breath. I told him everything, the man, the whisper, the disappearing act. He just stood there, silent. Then finally he said, "You're lucky." "Lucky?" I asked, still shaking. He hesitated. Most people who see him don't make it out. My stomach turned to ice. He poured me a cup of coffee and told me the truth. People disappear in those woods. A lot of people. They leave their gear behind, tents, backpacks, clothes, but they're never found. No signs of struggle. No tracks leading away. Just gone. And the ones who do come back? They always talk about the man with no voice. I never camped alone after that. And I never, ever went back to those woods. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. I moved to a different city. Got a new job. A new apartment. But sometimes at night, I'd wake up with that same feeling I had in those woods. That someone was watching me. At first, I told myself it was just paranoia. Trauma, maybe. A reaction to what had happened. Then, 3 months ago, I started seeing him. Not in the woods. Here. Once, in the reflection of a shop window. Another time, in the hallway of my apartment building, standing just past the stairwell, where the light didn't quite reach. Always barefoot. Always staring. Always mouthing words I couldn't hear. I stopped sleeping. Then 2 nights ago, I woke up to a sound that made my blood run cold. Crunch. 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 Footsteps. Not outside. Inside. I reached for the lamp on my nightstand, heart pounding. I gripped it tight, ready to swing. The footsteps stopped. Right outside my bedroom door. I forced myself to breathe, slow and steady. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I imagined it. Then, a whisper. Let me in. My grip tightened on the lamp. The doorknob started to turn. I lunged for the light switch. The room flooded with light. Nothing. But the carpet near my bedroom door was wet. like someone with bare, muddy feet had been standing there. I barely slept after that. And tonight, I don't think I'll sleep at all. Because a few minutes ago, I heard something. Not footsteps. Not a whisper. Something worse. Breathing. Right behind me. And when I turned around, he smiled. The first time I'd ever seen his mouth do anything except whisper. And that's when I realized. I could hear him now. And he was still whispering. And this time, I understood the words. You let me in. And I think he's right. I don't remember opening the door. I don't remember letting him inside. But somehow he's here now. And I don't think he's ever leaving. Lisa always had a thing for creepy places. Haunted houses, abandoned buildings, those late-night YouTube videos about real ghost sightings. Me, not so much. But when she suggested a camping trip near an old, abandoned cabin deep in the woods, I went along with it. It's gonna be cool, she said, grinning as she set up the tent. Think about it, a real haunted cabin. I forced a smile. But the truth was, the place gave me a bad feeling from the moment we got there. It wasn't just the fact that the cabin looked like something out of a horror movie, tilted, rotting, half swallowed by the forest. It was the silence. No birds. No rustling leaves. Just stillness. It felt wrong. Lisa, of course, was completely unfazed. She had her phone out, snapping pictures of the cabin like some urban explorer. Come on, she said, grabbing my hand. Let's check it out before dark. The door hung off its hinges, swaying slightly. I hesitated. Something inside me screamed, don't go in. But Lisa was already stepping through. The smell hit me first. Stale, moldy, with something else underneath. Something sour. The air was thick, heavy, like the cabin itself didn't want us there. Lisa walked ahead, shining her flashlight over the broken furniture, the cobwebbed ceiling beams. It's like a time capsule, she whispered. It did feel frozen in time. Old newspapers scattered on the floor, a rusted wood stove, a rocking chair that faced the window, as if someone had been sitting there, watching. That's when I saw them. Handprints. Faint but there. Smudged into the dust on the wooden walls. Too small to be an adult's. A child's, maybe. Lisa saw them too. She crouched down, running her fingers over them. Creepy, she murmured, grinning like she had just found buried treasure. Lisa, I said, my voice low. I don't like this. She sighed, standing up. It's just a cabin, babe. Don't be such a... Something thumped upstairs. We both froze. Another thump. Louder. Raccoon. Lisa whispered, but she didn't sound convinced. We backed toward the door. A floorboard creaked above us. Slow. Deliberate. Step. 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 Lisa grabbed my arm. I didn't wait to find out who, or what, was up there. I yanked her toward the exit, and we ran. We didn't stop until we were back at the tent, panting. Lisa laughed nervously. Okay, that was weird. I didn't laugh. By the time we settled in for the night, darkness had swallowed the woods. Lisa fell asleep almost instantly, but I lay awake, listening. Every crunch of leaves, every distant hoot of an owl, made my skin crawl. Then, just past midnight, I heard it. A faint, scraping sound against the fabric of the tent. My body went rigid. It was slow, almost methodical. Scrape. Scrape. Like someone dragging their fingers along the nylon. Lisa stirred beside me, but didn't wake up. I swallowed hard, grabbed my flashlight, and unzipped the tent just an inch. Just enough to peek out. Nothing. Just trees and moonlight. I exhaled. Probably an animal. Maybe a branch swaying in the wind. Then I saw it. A handprint. Pressed right against the side of our tent. A perfect, dusty handprint. Too big to be Lisa's. My heart slammed against my ribs. I shined the flashlight in every direction. No one was there. I turned back to wake Lisa. But then I heard it. Breathing. Deep. Raspy. Right behind the tent. My stomach twisted into knots. I clenched the flashlight tighter, my pulse hammering in my ears. I counted to 3. Then I yanked the zipper down and shined the beam outside. Nothing. Just the trees. Just the empty forest. But the handprint? Gone. Lisa woke up to me, shaking her. Someone's outside, I whispered. She sat up fast, eyes wide. What? We listened. But the woods were dead silent. Even the crickets had stopped chirping. Then, a soft thud. like a bare foot stepping on dirt. Lisa's hand found mine in the dark. "What do we do?" she breathed. I didn't answer. I just grabbed my pocket knife. Not much, but it was something. We stayed like that for what felt like hours, barely breathing. But nothing else happened. No footsteps. No whispers. Just silence. As soon as the first light of dawn hit, we packed up and got the hell out of there. The whole way back, Lisa tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe it was an animal. But I kept thinking about the breathing, that handprint, and the feeling I got in that cabin. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. So I looked up the history of the place. And that's when I found it. The cabin had been abandoned since 1976. A man named Walter Grayson had lived there with his wife and son. Until one night, when something went wrong. Walter was found 2 days later, deep in the woods, naked, covered in blood. He was raving about something, screaming about the handprint. The authorities assumed he had murdered his family in some kind of psychotic break. But here's the thing. They never found the bodies. Lisa hasn't talked about that night since. She laughs it off when people ask about the trip, says it was just spooky. But sometimes late at night, I catch her staring at the bedroom window. And the other night, I woke up to her whispering. I rolled over, my heart hammering. "Lisa." She didn't answer. She was sitting up in bed, facing the window, her back to me. Her fingers were pressed against the glass. A perfect, dusty handprint beneath them. And then, in the dark, I heard breathing. Right behind me. Camping trips always started the same way. Someone had to act tough. This time, it was Jake. "We should have hiked deeper," he grumbled, tossing another log onto the fire. "This close to the road, it's barely camping." "Maybe next time," I said, stretching out on my log. "Right now, I just want to roast some marshmallows and not get eaten by a bear." Sarah rolled her eyes. "You're more likely to die from Eric's cooking than a bear attack." Eric, flipping a sausage on the portable grill, raised a middle finger without looking up. Megan giggled and nudged me. "Well, I think this spot is perfect." She tilted her head up, gazing at the sky. The stars were sharp and endless, like holes poked into black velvet. "Feels like we're the only people left in the world." At the time, I thought that was a nice thing. I didn't know how wrong she was. The fire crackled and the night stretched around us, deep, dark, endless. The woods beyond our campsite swallowed everything, an ocean of blackness pressing in at the edges of the fire's glow. That's when Megan whispered, "Who's that?" My stomach clenched. "Who's who?" Jake asked, frowning. Megan's finger trembled as she pointed past the fire. Just beyond the orange glow, something stood between the trees. A shadow. Tall. Motionless. My breath hitched. "Probably a tree," Jake muttered. But then the shadow moved. A step closer. Then another. Sarah gasped. "Did you see that?" I grabbed my flashlight with a sweaty hand and aimed it toward the figure. Nothing. Just trees. A few branches swayed in the wind, but there was no one there. Megan's face was pale. I saw it move. Eric laughed nervously. All right, enough spooky shit. Let's drink." We all tried to laugh it off, but the mood had shifted. By midnight, we called it a night. We stamped out the fire, crawled into our tents, and zipped ourselves in. But I couldn't sleep. I lay there, staring at the dark fabric of the tent, listening. The night had gone too quiet. No chirping crickets, no rustling leaves. Just heavy, suffocating silence. Then, snap. A twig breaking. Close. I held my breath. Something was outside. I strained to hear, but there was nothing else. Just the faint echo of my heartbeat in my ears. I told myself it was my imagination, forced my eyes shut. But hours later, I woke again, this time for a different reason. I had to pee. I groaned, unzipping my sleeping bag, fumbling for my shoes. I unzipped the tent and stepped out. And froze. The fire was still burning. We had put it out. I was sure of it. But there it was, flames flickering softly in the pit. And beside it, a figure. Tall. Motionless. Staring at the fire. A cold spike of terror slid into my chest. The figure's arms were too long, hanging past its knees. Its head twitched unnaturally, like a puppet on broken strings. I tried to step back, and it turned. My breath stopped. I didn't see a face. just a gaping, black void where its mouth should have been. It tilted its head at me, the way a dog does when it hears a strange noise. And then, it moved. Not walked. Not ran. Just appeared closer than before. My body finally caught up with my brain. I ran. Branches clawed at my arms as I sprinted into the trees. My lungs burned. I didn't know where I was going, just away. The thing didn't make a sound, but I felt it behind me. And then suddenly, the fire. I was back at the campsite. I blinked, my heart hammering. That wasn't possible. I had run straight into the woods. But there was the fire pit. There were the tents. There was Megan's empty sleeping bag. The tent flap hung open. A cold dread settled in my stomach. Megan was gone. I stumbled to Jake's tent and shook him awake. "Megan's missing," I hissed. It took a second for my words to register. Then his face darkened. "What?" We woke the others, and within minutes we were searching the woods. But Megan was just gone. No footprints leading away. No sign of struggle. Just nothing. We searched for hours. At dawn, we called the police. They listened to our story, exchanged unreadable glances. Finally, one of them sighed and muttered, "Another one? Another one? What does that mean?" I asked, my voice sharp with panic. The officer hesitated. Then, after a long pause, he said, "You're the 5th group to report someone disappearing from this campsite." A sick feeling spread through my chest. "They all say the same thing," he continued. "A shadow in the woods. A figure by the fire. Then someone disappears." I felt like I was going to throw up. "Did you ever find them?" The officer looked at me, his face unreadable. "Not whole," he finally said. I didn't ask what that meant. I didn't want to know. We left that same day. We never talked about it. Never went camping again. But sometimes late at night, I think I hear a crackle of fire outside my window. And once, I woke up to the smell of smoke. I looked outside and saw a shadow standing in the trees, watching, waiting. And the next morning, Megan's number had disappeared from my phone, like she had never existed at all. Some places feel cursed. Not in the obvious way. No crumbling buildings, no eerie ghost stories told by locals, but in a way that seeps into your skin. The air feels too thick, the shadows stretch too long, and the silence? It's wrong. I should have known better. I should have listened to that voice in the back of my head that whispered, "Don't stay here." But I didn't. And because of that, my brother almost didn't make it out. Danny and I had planned this trip for months. A weekend camping deep in the forests of Blackwood Pines. No cell service, no distractions, I told him. Just us and nature. Danny, being 16 and permanently attached to his phone, wasn't thrilled. But he agreed. Mostly because our dad had guilt-tripped him about spending quality time with his brother before college. We hiked 6 miles into the woods, far from the marked trails, searching for a secluded clearing. Around dusk, we found the perfect spot. A wide-open space with tall pine trees forming a natural barrier. Too perfect. Looking back, I realized that spot had been waiting for us. We set up the tent, gathered firewood, and by nightfall, we were sitting around a small fire, roasting marshmallows. The sky above was too clear, the stars too bright, the night too silent. I should have noticed the signs, but I was too busy trying to bond with my brother. It wasn't until later, long after we had zipped ourselves into the tent and drifted off to sleep, that I realized we were not alone. The first scream jolted me awake. A high, piercing sound that sliced through the trees like a razor. I shot up, heart pounding, ears straining. Danny didn't stir. He slept like the dead, always had. I held my breath, listening. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it was a fox or a bobcat. They made weird noises at night, right? Then the second scream came. Closer. My stomach twisted. I reached for my flashlight and unzipped the tent as quietly as I could. The night air was freezing. Our fire had burned down to embers. I scanned the trees with the flashlight. Nothing. And then I saw it. The blood. Dark streaks ran down the trunks of the pine trees like open wounds, dripping onto the forest floor. My breath hitched. Not sap. Not moisture. It looked too thick. Too real. And then, Danny screamed. A raw, inhuman sound. I whirled around, diving back into the tent. Danny was thrashing, his body convulsing, his eyes wide open but not seeing. "They're inside me," he sobbed, clawing at his temples. "They're in my head." I grabbed his arms. "Danny, it's a nightmare. Wake up." He kept screaming. His fingers tore at his scalp, scratching, digging. His whole body jerked like something was inside him, twisting, turning. And then, he stopped. His breathing slowed. His muscles went slack. His eyes rolled back into place. A long silence filled the tent. What happened?" he whispered, his voice small. I swallowed the bile in my throat. "I don't know," I lied. "But I did. Something was out there. Something that wanted in." We didn't sleep after that. At the first sign of dawn, we packed up. Neither of us spoke. The forest was too quiet. Not a single bird. Not a single rustling leaf. I felt it. A weight in the air, pressing against my skin, whispering against my ears. I knew if I turned around, I would see something. Something watching. So I kept my eyes forward. As we reached the edge of the clearing, I stole one last look. The trees weren't bleeding anymore. They stood still, tall, ordinary. Like nothing had ever happened. But then I saw our tent, and my stomach dropped. The fabric was shredded. Not ripped by an animal. The claw marks were long, deep, precise, like fingernails had torn through it from the inside. I didn't say anything. I just turned and walked. And I never went back. That should have been the end of it. A terrifying weekend. A close call. A story to laugh about years later. But it wasn't. Danny was never the same. At first, it was small things. He couldn't sleep without the lights on. He refused to go anywhere near the woods. Then he stopped sleeping altogether. He lost weight. He stopped talking. I would catch him staring at nothing for hours, his fingers twitching against his temples. Like he could still feel something inside. One night, I heard him whispering. I pressed my ear against his bedroom door. At first, I thought he was talking to himself. Then I realized he was answering to something that wasn't there. I moved away for college. Tried to put that night behind me. Tried to forget the screams. Tried to forget the way the trees bled. Then last week my phone rang. It was my mother. She was crying. Danny had vanished. She found his window wide open, his room a mess. But what made my blood run cold was what she found on his walls. Scratches. Deep. Violent. Desperate. Like fingernails trying to get out. And written in dark, dripping letters. They're inside me. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my dark apartment, staring at the walls, listening to the wind outside. And then I heard it. Soft. Far away. A scream. Coming from the trees. Calling my name. And in that moment I knew. Danny wasn't missing. Danny had gone back. Back to the forest. Back to them. And they were waiting for me too. I never should have swum in that lake. I know that now, but back then, I was just some dumb 19-year-old looking for a thrill. It was me and Rob, my best friend since we were kids, out on one last camping trip before life got in the way. We were about to go our separate ways, me to college, him to a full-time construction gig. It felt like the end of something. Maybe that's why we pushed ourselves harder that weekend. Maybe that's why we went deeper into the woods than we ever had before. That's how we found it. The trees thinned, the ground sloped downward, and there it was, a lake we'd never seen before. No signs, no trails leading to it. Just sitting there, silent, hidden. It wasn't even on the map. And it was too still. You ever see a lake that doesn't move? No ripples, no insects skimming the surface, no fish jumping? That's what it was like. A slab of black glass buried in the trees. And the air around it? Wrong. Not cold. Not warm. Just empty. Like the world didn't exist past this place. Rob was the one who saw it first. "Holy shit," he whispered, stepping closer. "Dude, look at that." I didn't want to look at it. But I did. Then he got that grin, the one that always meant trouble. "You should swim across it." I laughed, but it came out wrong, like there was something heavy pressing against my chest. "Pass. Come on, man. One last dare, for old time's sake." That was how he always got me. One last dare. And I never backed down from a dare. I stripped down to my boxers and stepped in. The water was freezing. Not like normal lake cold. This was something else. It felt ancient. Like I'd just stepped into something dead. The water swallowed my legs. My stomach. My chest. I felt them all over. But I pushed off, started swimming, arms cutting through the black surface. Halfway across, something touched my leg. A brush at first. A whisper of movement. I stopped, treading water. Probably a fish. Right? Then it grabbed me. Thin fingers, ice cold, wrapped around my ankle and pulled. I didn't even have time to scream before I was yanked under. Blackness. I opened my eyes. There was a face. Right in front of me. Pale. Hollow eyes. A mouth too wide, stretching open like a black hole, swirling with darkness. I tried to scream. All that came out was a burst of bubbles. The hand around my ankle tightened. The darkness in its mouth spilled out, pouring toward me like ink in water. I thrashed. I kicked. I fought. And then from somewhere above, "Michael!" Rob's voice. I jerked. The thing's grip slipped. I kicked free and swam, lungs burning, toward the light. I burst through the surface, gasping, choking. Rob was on the shore, waving his arms. "Swim, man." I swam like my life depended on it. Because it did. When I hit the shore, I collapsed, coughing up black water. Rob was pale. "Jesus Christ, dude, you." He stopped. His eyes went to my leg. "Your ankle," he whispered. I looked down. There was a handprint. Long fingers, too thin, pressing into my skin. Like something had been trying to pull me down. We left that night. Didn't even pack up the tent. We ran. And I told myself I'd forget about the lake. But I couldn't. Because after that night, I started having dreams. Dreams of being underwater. Dreams of that face. And every time I woke up, I swore I could taste the lake in my mouth. A few weeks later, I did some digging. That lake. It wasn't supposed to be there. 50 years ago, there was a town where it sat now. A flood wiped it off the map. Most of the people escaped. One girl didn't. Lily Matheson, 16 years old. Last seen running toward the church as the floodwaters rose. Her body was never found. Some say she drowned alone, swallowed by the black water. Some say she's still waiting down there, beneath the surface, waiting for someone to take her place. 2 months after that night, Rob disappeared. They found his truck on the side of the highway, keys still in the ignition. No sign of him, just wet footprints leading into the woods. Like he'd walked into the trees on his own. Like he'd gone back. And I know what you're thinking. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe it wasn't connected at all. But I don't believe in coincidences. And some nights, when I close my eyes, I can still feel those fingers wrapped around my ankle. Still taste the lake in my mouth. And I know one thing for certain. She's not done with me yet. We should have never gone to Black Hollow Valley. That's what I tell myself now, lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling while the whispers crawl through my skull like 100 cold fingers. I tell myself we should have turned back the second we saw the bones. Or maybe when the forest went too quiet. Or when the air got that thick, watching feeling like we weren't alone. But we didn't. Because we were idiots. Mark was the one who wanted to go. Said we needed one last trip before he shipped off to the Marines. Anna wasn't thrilled about it. Neither was I, if I'm being honest. But Mark had that way of making things sound stupid if you were scared of them. "It's just a forest," he'd said, leaning against his truck, a cigarette dangling from his lips. "People tell stories. That's what people do." Anna crossed her arms. "People disappear there." Mark scoffed. "People disappear everywhere." And I, like a goddamn fool, said, "Let's just go." It was a 4-hour hike, and the deeper we went, the quieter it got. At first, we blamed it on the time of year, late October, the kind of crisp, gray cold that makes the trees look dead before winter even gets there. But after the first 2 hours, I noticed something. No birds. No wind. No rustling in the underbrush. Like the whole damn forest was holding its breath. Then we found the bones. A small pile near the base of a gnarled old tree, white and clean, scattered in the dirt like something had peeled the flesh right off. Too big to be a squirrel. Too small to be a deer. Anna didn't like that. "Guys, seriously, maybe we should." Mark laughed. "Oh, come on. It's an animal." He nudged one of the bones with his boot, rolling it over. "Or a really tiny serial killer. You pick." Anna shot me a look. I didn't know what to say. We should have left. But we didn't. We made camp by a stream, set up the tent, got a fire going. After an hour, it almost felt normal. We drank whiskey. Mark told a story about some guy in his town who swore he saw Bigfoot. Anna laughed. Everything was fine. Until the whispers started. Soft, urgent voices. Coming from the trees. Mark heard them first. He frowned, looking over his shoulder. The hell was that? Anna stiffened. You heard it too? I hadn't at first. But once they mentioned it, I did. Low, breathy murmurs. Too many voices at once. They weren't saying words, not exactly. It was more like a sound, like wind through dead leaves, but wrong. Anna grabbed my wrist. Who's out there? Mark grabbed the flashlight and stood up. He shined it toward the trees. Hello. The whispers stopped. Just like that. Like someone had pressed mute on the whole damn forest. We waited. Listened. Nothing. Mark exhaled, laughing a little. Wind, see? You guys. Then just past the trees. A shadow moved. I didn't see it clearly. Just a shape, shifting too fast between the trunks. I felt cold all over. Mark lowered the flashlight. His face was pale. Maybe we should. A snap of a branch behind us. Anna whirled. No. Mark killed the light. Inside. Now. We dove into the tent, zipped it up fast. The air inside was thick, stale, wrong. Anna was breathing too fast. Mark clutched his knife so hard his knuckles went white. The whispers started again. Louder this time. Closer. Mark unzipped the tent an inch and peeked out. Then, he froze. His breath hitched. What? I whispered. He didn't answer. Just stared. Anna crawled forward and looked too. Then she clamped a hand over her mouth, her whole body shaking. I had to see. I pressed my face to the gap in the tent, and my blood turned to ice. Figures. Dozens of them. Standing perfectly still in the dark. Surrounding our campsite. Heads tilted slightly, like they were listening. They weren't talking. They weren't moving. Then all at once, they took a step closer. Mark yanked the zipper shut. Nope. 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 Anna was shaking. What do we do? The whispers grew louder. And then, they were inside the tent. Right behind us. A breath, cold and wet, brushed the back of my neck. A voice whispered something right against my ear. I didn't understand the words. But I knew what it meant. Why did you come? Anna screamed. We ran. Didn't grab our bags. Didn't grab our knives. Just ran. The forest was endless. No trail. No moonlight. Just trees and whispers that curled around us like fingers reaching, tugging, pulling us back. I don't know how long we ran. At some point, the whispers stopped. The woods opened up. The highway was there. And Mark's truck. We didn't stop. We piled in, Mark's hands shaking so bad he could barely get the key in the ignition. The tires skidded on gravel, then we were gone. None of us spoke. The next morning, we went back for our gear. The tent was gone. Not torn apart. Not destroyed. Just gone. No footprints. No sign we had ever been there. Like we had never existed. Anna left for Chicago a week later. She never talked about that night again. Mark lasted 2 months before he snapped. He stopped sleeping. Stopped talking. Then one night he just disappeared. They found his truck on the side of the road near Black Hollow Valley. The doors were wide open. The engine still running. But he was gone. They searched for weeks. Never found a body. As for me, sometimes late at night I hear them. The whispers. Coming from my closet. From my vents. From the dark corners of my room where the light doesn't reach. Sometimes, I wake up and find the tent standing at the foot of my bed. Canvas ripped. Poles bent at odd angles. And inside, figures. Standing perfectly still. Heads tilted. Listening. Waiting. And each night, they take a step closer. There's something about the deep woods that unsettles the mind. It's not like the city, where lights hum and traffic never truly dies. Out there, in the middle of nowhere, it's just you and the trees. And the silence. It creeps in slowly, like fog rolling over a lake. The kind of silence that isn't natural. It sits heavy in the air, pressing into your skin, settling into your bones. In the city, silence is a comfort. In the woods, it's a warning. I should have listened. But Jake and I thought we were invincible. It was supposed to be a normal weekend camping trip. 2 best friends, a couple of 6-packs, a tent, and the promise of escaping the world for a few days. We used to do this all the time in college, hike out deep into the woods, set up camp, and pretend we were explorers, just two guys against the wild. That's what we told ourselves. But the woods don't care what you tell yourself. We parked at the trailhead just after noon, loaded our backpacks, and started hiking. The first couple of miles were easy, worn dirt trails, tall pines swaying in the breeze, the smell of damp earth. We talked about work, about life, about how we needed to do this more often. Then the trail thinned out, the trees grew thicker, and that feeling started. It was small at first, just a prickling sensation at the back of my neck, like I was being watched. I told myself it was nothing. I had been in the woods plenty of times. Sometimes your mind plays tricks. Sometimes the quiet is too quiet. We found a clearing near the ridge just before sunset, a perfect little spot to set up camp. Jake got the fire going while I set up the tent. We cracked open our beers and let the warmth of the flames sink into our bones. And for a while it was peaceful. Then the sun went down, and the woods changed. I didn't notice it at first. The fire was crackling, the stars were out, and the beer was cold. But then I felt it again. That prickle. That sensation of being watched. I glanced at Jake. He had stopped talking. He was staring past me, out into the dark. His face had gone pale. I turned, and that's when I saw them. Two small, glowing eyes just beyond the firelight. They weren't reflecting the flames. They weren't like animal eyes, flickering in and out of sight. They were glowing. From within. Watching. My breath hitched in my throat. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light, but then, another pair of eyes opened. Then another. And another. Within seconds, dozens of them blinked open, floating in the darkness, motionless. Jake whispered, "We need to leave." His voice barely registered. Because I could feel it now. The weight of their gaze. Like cold fingers brushing against my skin. Something moved. Not the eyes. Not at first. But the trees. The shadows shifted, stretched, like something tall was standing there, just barely out of sight. Jake turned on his flashlight. The beam cut through the dark and landed on something wrong. It was tall, too tall. At least 7 feet, maybe more. Its limbs were long and thin, stretched unnaturally, its fingers almost reaching the ground. Its skin was pale, the color of old wax, and it had no mouth. No nose. Just a smooth, featureless face. Except for its eyes. They glowed in the dark, empty and endless. And then, it took a step forward. Not a stumble. Not a lurch. A smooth, calculated step. And the others followed. I grabbed Jake's arm. "Run." We bolted. The whispers started almost immediately. Soft, breathy, curling through the trees like smoke. They weren't words. They weren't even sounds. They were just there, pressing into my skull, wrapping around my brain like cold fingers. I ran faster. The branches clawed at my face, my arms, my legs. My breath burned in my chest, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. Jake tripped. He hit the ground hard, his flashlight rolling into the dirt. I turned back, reaching for him. And then I saw them, standing at the edge of the clearing. Dozens of them. Tall. Pale. Still. Their heads were tilted, like they were listening. Like they could hear my heartbeat. Jake scrambled to his feet. I grabbed his arm and we ran. I don't remember how we made it back to the car. My body was running on pure instinct, a primal fear older than language itself. The second we hit the clearing, I jammed the key into the ignition, hands shaking so bad I could barely turn it. Jake slammed the door shut just as the headlights flicked on. And that's when we saw them, just beyond the trees. They weren't moving anymore. They were waiting. Pale, faceless figures. Silent. Motionless. Jake whispered, "Jesus Christ." I floored the gas. The car skidded in the dirt for a second before catching traction, launching us forward. I didn't look back. I couldn't. We didn't stop until we were miles away, back on paved roads, back in civilization. But the feeling didn't leave me. That awful, crawling sensation of being watched. The next morning, I couldn't shake it. I looked up the area. There used to be a town there. An old mining village, abandoned over 100 years ago. The people who lived there, they went blind before they died. Some sickness took their eyes first. Some say they still wander the woods, looking for new ones to take. Ellie was the first to go missing. The 5 of us, me, Jake, Ellie, Sam, and Ben, had been out in the woods for a weekend of camping, drinking, and pretending that life wasn't eating us alive. The trees stretched high overhead, the kind that let in just enough moonlight to make you think you saw things that weren't there. It was supposed to be a fun trip. That was before Ellie walked into the woods and never came back. She had gone to gather firewood, said she wouldn't go far. We heard her footsteps crunch through the leaves, the occasional snap of a branch. Then nothing. At first, we weren't worried. Maybe she was taking her time, maybe she was messing with us. But 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Ellie, Jake called out, standing up and shining his flashlight into the trees. Silence. A cold wind rustled through the leaves. The fire flickered. Damn it, Ben muttered. She's probably hiding behind a tree, laughing her ass off. But I felt it then. That deep, gut-clenching unease. Like the woods were holding their breath. Then, a voice. Soft. Desperate. Ellie's voice. Guys, help me. It came from deep in the trees, farther than she should have gone. I felt my stomach drop. The voice wasn't quite right. It had that odd, warbling quality, like an old recording played at the wrong speed. Jake turned to us, his face pale. That's not Ellie. And then we heard it again. From behind us. Help me. The exact same tone. The exact same pitch. The same wrongness. Sam's breath hitched. Okay, what the hell? Crunch. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. A figure stepped out from the trees. Ellie. Or something that looked like Ellie. Same hoodie. Same jeans. Same brown hair hanging over her face. But something was off. She stood too straight, her arms stiff at her sides. Her head was tilted at an unnatural angle, like a puppet whose strings had been twisted too tight. Then she spoke. Guys, help me. The exact same words. The exact same tone. Not similar. Identical. Ben let out a nervous laugh. Very funny, Ellie. You got us. Ellie, or the thing pretending to be Ellie, didn't move. Didn't blink. Didn't breathe. It just stood there, head tilted, mouth slightly open. Then it smiled. A slow, mechanical smile. Too wide. Too forced. The fire crackled. The wind whistled through the trees. The silence stretched so long I could hear my own heartbeat. Jake took a step back. That's not Ellie. Ben scoffed. What the hell are you talking about? That's her. Ellie's mouth opened wider, her jaw stretching just a little too far. Then, in that same frozen, rehearsed voice, she said, Guys, help me. We ran. Behind us it moved. Not walked. Moved. 1 second it was standing by the trees. The next it was closer. Too fast. Too smooth. Like it wasn't stepping, just shifting. Then the whispers started. Ellie's voice. Coming from everywhere. Guys, help me. Guys, help me. Guys, help me. Over and over, overlapping. Layers of her voice bleeding together like a broken record skipping on repeat. I felt something ice-cold graze the back of my neck. I turned, and saw another Ellie. Standing just behind me, inches away. Grinning. Head bent sideways, eyes wide and empty, mouth stretched too far. I screamed. The others had already bolted. Branches whipped my arms, thorns tore at my clothes, but I didn't care. We reached the car. I fumbled with the keys, hands shaking so badly I could barely shove them into the ignition. Jake was breathing hard. What the hell was that? Ben was still staring back, his face twisted in horror. Then he whispered, It's still there. I turned the key. The engine roared to life. And in the rearview mirror, Ellie, standing at the edge of the trees, still smiling, her head tilted at that same impossible angle. Then slowly she raised a hand and waved. We didn't stay to watch what happened next. I slammed the car into reverse, peeling out of there so fast the tires skidded on the dirt. We didn't stop driving until we reached town. We crashed at my place that night, too shaken to sleep. Every sound made us jump. Every shadow looked like her. The next morning, my phone rang. It was the police. They had found Ellie's body. Miles away. She had been dead for 2 days. So what the hell had been in the woods with us that night? We never should have taken that road. It was my fault. I was the one navigating, staring at a barely loaded map on my phone. the signal dropping to nothing but a mocking little X in the corner. "Take the next left," I had said, confident as hell. Jake, always trusting me too much, turned onto a narrow dirt road, the tires crunching over loose gravel. Maddie sat in the back, her arms crossed, skeptical from the start. "This doesn't look like the right way," she muttered. And she was right. Half an hour later, we were completely lost. The trees pressed in close on both sides, towering in black against the evening sky. The road had narrowed, looking less like something meant for cars and more like an old, forgotten trail. It felt wrong. "We should turn around," Maddie said. "Where?" Jake snapped. "There's no space." He was right. We were wedged between thick trees and endless darkness. The idea of reversing all the way back through that twisting road made my stomach curl. Then we saw the light. A campfire, flickering between the trees, casting a glow against the trunks. Relief flooded through me. "See, other people. Maybe we can ask them where the hell we are." Jake hesitated but steered toward the light. We pulled into a small clearing, the fire burning low but steady in the center. The first thing that struck me was that it wasn't empty. Not exactly. 3 tents stood near the fire, zipped shut. A picnic table sat off to the side, a blue cooler perched on top, its lid cracked open. Empty beer bottles littered the ground. "Guess they're out hiking or something," Jake said. But my skin prickled. It was too quiet. No wind. No crickets. No distant chatter of campers. Just the soft crackling of the fire, too loud in the still night. I stepped out of the car, feeling Maddie tense behind me. "We shouldn't be here," she said. "Where else are we supposed to go?" I muttered, but I agreed with her. Something felt off. Jake walked over to one of the tents and crouched beside it. "Hello," he called, knocking against the nylon fabric. "Nothing." He glanced at us, then slowly unzipped the tent. Then he reeled back. "What the hell?" I hurried over. Looked inside. Nothing. No sleeping bags. No backpacks. No clothes. Just an empty shell of a tent. Maddie checked the second one. Same thing. I swallowed hard and stepped toward the third. My fingers trembled as I grabbed the zipper. It was already unzipped. The flap hung open, swaying slightly. The inside was dark. Too dark. Like the space inside was deeper than it should have been. Like if I stepped in, I wouldn't come back out. A gust of wind rushed past me, ice cold, cutting through my jacket. And then, the fire went out. Not slowly. Not like normal flames. 1 second it was there. The next it was gone. Darkness swallowed the clearing. Maddie let out a shaky breath. "We need to leave." I turned toward the car, my legs stiff and clumsy. Then, just for a second, I glanced back. The tents were gone. Not collapsed. Not moved. Just gone. The fire pit? Nothing but a patch of dirt. My breath caught in my throat. "Jake!" He turned. His eyes widened. "What the?" A sound cut through the silence. Laughter. Distant. Echoing. But it wasn't coming from a single place. It was all around us. Jake grabbed my arm. "Run." We sprinted to the car, yanking the doors open, slamming them shut. Jake jammed the keys into the ignition. The engine wouldn't start. Come on, he hissed. A twig snapped. I didn't want to look. But I did. And I wished I hadn't. There was someone standing at the edge of the trees. A shape. Tall. Too tall. Arms too long. Head tilted like it was listening. The shadows clung to it, like it wasn't supposed to be seen. The engine roared to life. Jake floored it, the tires kicking up dirt as we shot forward. The thing at the tree line didn't move. But as we tore down the road, I had the sick, gut-wrenching feeling that it was following us anyway. Even though I couldn't see it anymore. Even though we left the campsite far behind. It was still there. Watching. Waiting. The next morning, we found a gas station. Civilization. Light. Normal sounds. Maddie pulled out her phone, her fingers shaking as she typed. And then she froze. Jake leaned over. "What?" She turned the screen toward us. An old newspaper article. 3 campers vanished without a trace in that exact spot years ago. Their campsite was found untouched. The fire still burning. No footprints leading in or out. No bodies. Just gone. I stared at the words. My throat was dry. Jake ran a hand through his hair. That was their campfire, wasn't it? I didn't answer, because I already knew. That wasn't our campsite, and that wasn't our fire. It had been waiting, and next time, it might not let us leave. It was supposed to be our last adventure together before life pulled us in different directions. We were 19, fresh out of high school, and standing at the edge of adulthood. Jake was heading off to college in New York. Sarah had a job lined up at her dad's law firm. Ellie was moving in with her boyfriend. And me? I had no clue what I was doing yet, but I knew that whatever came next, things would never be the same. So when Ellie suggested one last camping trip, we all agreed. 3 days in the woods, just us, no cell service, no distractions. A final goodbye to the summer before we scattered like leaves in the wind. The trip had been amazing. Days filled with hikes, nights filled with beer and ghost stories around the fire. But by the third day, we were exhausted. The novelty of sleeping on the ground had worn off, and we were all ready for real beds and hot showers. Just before we packed up, Sarah had an idea. Let's take one last photo. A memory before we go. We found a good spot, the dying campfire behind us, the woods stretching out in all directions. Ellie set up her phone on a tree stump, propped it with a rock, and set the timer. 10 seconds, she called, running back to us. We huddled together, arms draped over each other, grinning like idiots. Click. A frozen moment in time. A perfect goodbye. Or so we thought. It wasn't until we were halfway home that I pulled out my phone and checked the picture. And my stomach turned to ice. There was someone else in the photo. A fifth person. Tall. Thin. Standing just behind us, half hidden in the shadows of the trees. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. Maybe a tree branch or a weird shadow. But as I stared, I realized. It had a face. A hollow face. Deep black sockets where the eyes should have been. My breath caught in my throat. I shoved the phone toward Jake, who was in the passenger seat. Tell me you see that. Jake frowned, took the phone, and his face drained of color. What the hell? Ellie, sitting in the back with Sarah, leaned forward. What? What is it? Jake turned the phone so she could see. Ellie sucked in a sharp breath. Oh my God. Sarah grabbed the phone next. No, that has to be some trick. A glitch or something. Jake swallowed. Glitches don't have faces. We zoomed in. The figure's mouth was open. Not in a scream. Not in a smile. Just open like it was trying to say something. No one spoke for a long time. The only sound was the hum of the tires on the highway. Finally, Ellie whispered. We were alone. Right. None of us answered. When I got home, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in my gut. That deep, primal fear that something wasn't right. I couldn't stop looking at the photo. Something about the figure's posture. The way it leaned in toward us. The way it almost blended with the trees, as if it had always been there. And then, for some reason, I did something I hadn't done before. I checked the other pictures. The ones from earlier in the trip. The ones from the first night. And my blood ran cold. Because the figure was in those too. Faint at first. A shadow among the trees, barely noticeable. In the next, it was closer. And then closer still. It had been following us. Watching. In one picture, taken on our second night, the figure stood near our tent. Just standing there. Waiting. And then I got to the last photo. The one we took right before we left. The one where the figure had stepped out of the trees completely. It was right behind me. Its hand long, bony, pale, resting lightly on my shoulder. I dropped the phone. For a long time, I couldn't breathe. Then, with shaking hands, I picked it up again. I checked the timestamps. Every photo, even the ones taken days earlier, had changed. The figure was always there now, getting closer and closer. I called Ellie first. No answer. I called Sarah. Straight to voicemail. Jake finally picked up, his voice groggy. Dude, it's like midnight. What? Check your photos, I said. Right now. He sighed, but I heard rustling as he moved around. Then silence. A long, horrible silence. Jesus Christ, he whispered. I swallowed. It changed for you too? A shaky breath. It's in all of them. I sat on the edge of my bed, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. What the hell is this, Jake? He didn't answer right away. Then, in a low, terrified voice, he said, I think we brought something back with us. The next morning, I barely slept. My eyes burned, my head pounded. I was about to head out to see Jake when I noticed something on my porch. A package. No return address. Just my name, scrawled in shaky, uneven letters. With a sense of deepening dread, I picked it up. It was a photo. Printed. Glossy. The last picture. The one where the figure had its hand on my shoulder. But this one was different. Because in this version, the figure wasn't behind me anymore. It was inside my house. I haven't left my apartment in 3 days. I haven't answered my phone. Because I know if I look again, if I check the photos one more time, the figure will be standing right behind me. And this time, it won't just be a picture.